Some crimes are just that, crimes, but some reach into the deepest fears of a society. In August 1969, Hollywood was shaken to its core. A famous actress, Sharon Tate, was brutally murdered while 8.5 months pregnant. No motive for money, no personal vendetta, only blood, pain, and the command of a man who never held a knife. His name was Charles Manson. He didn't kill anyone himself, but he made an entire nation tremble. In this podcast episode, we step into one of the darkest chapters of modern history, where music became a signal for death, where well-behaved youths turned into cold-blooded killers, and where a so-called family spread nightmares across America. Welcome to the Manson Family, the cold-blooded prophet, and the Sharon Tate murders. In 1969, Hollywood was like a glittering crown atop America's head. Beneath the dazzling golden lights, with its classic films, lavish parties, and glamorous movie stars, the whole world looked on in awe. Among those rising stars was Sharon Tate, a young actress seen as the embodiment of purity and grace. At just 26 years old, she was expecting her first child with famed director Roman Polanski. Sharon lived in a luxurious home at 10,050 Cielo Drive, a quiet, secluded spot nestled in the hills of Beverly Hills. She was waiting for Polanski to return from Europe. In those days, she often invited friends over to relax, talk, and enjoy the calm before the baby arrived. No one could have imagined that this peaceful house would soon become the scene of one of the most horrifying massacres in American history. In the early hours of August 9th, while Hollywood still slept beneath the glow of the night, a group of strangers broke into Sharon's home. They weren't robbers. They held no grudge against their victims. What they carried wasn't just knives and guns, but an invisible command from a man who never set foot at the scene, Charles Manson. The crime didn't just take the lives of 5 innocent people, including Sharon, who was 8.5 months pregnant. It shattered the Hollywood dream, sending shockwaves of terror through every corner of America. On the front door, the killers scrawled the word pig in blood. No explanation, no clear trail, only blood, bodies, and a chilling silence. This wasn't just a murder, it was a declaration of war on society. From a man who never wielded the knife, but held the deadly power of manipulation in his hands. And from that moment on, the name Manson became a symbol of evil wearing a human face. Charles Manson wasn't like your typical serial killer. He didn't wield a weapon. He left no fingerprints. In fact, he never even met most of his victims. Yet he was the origin of every tragedy, the invisible hand guiding a fanatical group that the media would later call the Manson Family. Born in 1934, Manson grew up in poverty, abandoned by his mother, and spent most of his youth in reform schools and prisons. He once dreamed of becoming a famous singer. After his release, he drifted to San Francisco, at a time when the city was exploding with the hippie movement, rock music, drugs, and dreams of spiritual liberation. It was there that Manson found a new path, not through music, but through absolute power, the power of being worshipped. He began attracting lost, disillusioned teenagers, most of them young women, through rambling sermons that blended Christianity, Buddhism, Eastern philosophy, LSD, and free love. Manson didn't need to kill, he simply planted the belief in their minds that he was the embodiment of God, the one who would lead them into a new world after the coming race war. To his followers, Charles Manson wasn't crazy. He was truth. He was family. He was everything. At a rundown ranch called Spahn in California, his group lived in an isolated commune. There, Manson's word was law. He gave them new names. He demanded they free their minds, forget their pasts, their parents, and society itself. It wasn't just a group anymore. It had become a cult. Then Manson started preaching about war, about the downfall of the white race, about how Black Americans would rise up and slaughter everyone, but wouldn't be smart enough to run the world. And when that time came, he and his family would emerge from hiding in the desert and take control of the new order. That plan had a name, Helter Skelter, a term he took from a Beatles song, but twisted into a deranged prophecy, an apocalyptic vision. And to spark that war, he needed blood. He needed chaos. He needed brutal murders that could be pinned on black people to throw society into panic and ignite the collapse. That's when he gave the order, and the Manson family began to spread death. On August 8, 1969, the sky over Los Angeles glowed red with sunset. While Hollywood sank into its usual weekend parties, at the Spahn Ranch, Charles Manson summoned 4 of his most devoted followers: Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. He didn't need to say much, just a chilling order. Go to that house, kill everyone inside, make it something the world will never forget. The target: 10,050 Cielo Drive. Its current resident was Sharon Tate, 8.5 months pregnant, along with 3 friends. Jay Sebring, a famous hairstylist and former fiancé of Sharon. Wojciech Frykowski, a Polish screenwriter. Abigail Folger, heiress to the Folgers' coffee fortune. And Stephen Parent, a young man who just happened to stop by that night. Around midnight, Tex Watson climbed over the fence. Linda Kasabian stood watch outside. They entered through a window, armed with knives, guns, and a blind devotion to kill. Stephen Parent was the first victim, shot dead in his car as he was about to leave. Then they stormed into the house without warning, like wolves in the night. Wojciech was beaten and stabbed repeatedly as he tried to escape. Jay Sebring was shot and had his throat slashed as he tried to protect Sharon. Abigail Folger made it to the yard, but they caught up and stabbed her to death. And Sharon, tied up with Jay at the beginning, was the last. Dragged into the living room, she begged for her baby's life. "Please don't kill me. Please let my baby live," Sharon pleaded, according to Susan Atkins. But mercy had no place in the minds of the brainwashed. Sharon was stabbed 16 times. Her unborn child never had a chance. After the massacre, they used the victim's blood to write the word pig on the front door, a savage act meant to send a message and signal the beginning of Manson's Helter Skelter. They didn't steal anything. They didn't want money. Their only goal was death and fear. The next morning, the scene was hellish, blood everywhere. Bodies scattered amidst the silence and luxury. Even the most seasoned investigators were left breathless. And America woke up trembling. Helter Skelter, originally the title of a Beatles song, was about a spiraling amusement park slide. But in the mind of Charles Manson, it meant something entirely different. An apocalyptic prophecy, a bloody revolution he believed would wipe out the current social order and usher in a new world. A world where he and his followers would be worshipped like gods. Manson interpreted the song in his own twisted way. He believed Helter Skelter was a coded message about an inevitable race war between black and white people. He claimed black Americans would rise up and kill all whites, but would then be unable to govern the world on their own. That's when the Manson family would emerge from the shadows and take control. A madman's theory? Probably. But to his isolated followers, living in the desert, fed a steady diet of drug-fueled, warped sermons, it became truth. Manson didn't need logic. He needed faith. And he got it. The night after Sharon Tate's murder, while the blood was still fresh, Manson pushed further. He believed the world hadn't been shocked enough, the chaos wasn't deep enough. So on the night of August 10th, he led the group himself to another target. The home of Lenyo and Rosemary LaBianca, a married couple living in Los Feliz, Los Angeles. Leno was a successful businessman. Rosemary owned a clothing store. They had no connection to Sharon Tate, no ties to Manson or his followers, and that made their murders all the more senseless and terrifying. Manson broke in and tied them up. Then he left the killing to his followers. Leno was stabbed 26 times, a knife driven straight into his abdomen. Rosemary was stabbed over 40 times. Afterward, the killers used the victim's blood to scrawl phrases like "death to pigs" and "rise" on the walls. They even carved the word "war" into Leno's stomach using a carving fork. To Manson, this wasn't just murder, it was a message. He wanted police to believe the killings were the work of black radicals. He wanted to spread suspicion, ignite fear, and push society to the brink. But things didn't unfold the way he envisioned. Society didn't collapse. The black community didn't rise up. Helter Skelter, his so-called doomsday, never came. Instead, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Names, faces, whispers among once loyal followers, betrayals. And one by one, the shadows began to lift. October 1969, just 2 months after the Tate-LaBianca massacre, a surprising turning point emerged. One member of the Manson family was arrested for an unrelated car theft. While in jail, he casually bragged about the horrific murders his group had committed. That loose-lipped confession led police down a trail of clues, slowly connecting the dots. And finally, the name Charles Manson surfaced, like a spider sitting at the center of a deadly web. Manson and his accomplices were arrested, but the trial, rather than being a solemn pursuit of justice, turned into one of the most bizarre, terrifying spectacles in American legal history. From the start, Manson tried to control the courtroom just as he had controlled his followers. He shaved his head bald, carved an X into his forehead, and declared, "I am outside your world." The next day, all of his female followers showed up with matching X's carved into their foreheads, a disturbing display of unwavering loyalty. On the witness stand, Susan Atkins recounted, without a hint of remorse, how she stabbed Sharon Tate, how the pregnant woman begged for her baby's life. Patricia Krenwinkel smirked while talking about Abigail Folger's death. And Leslie Van Houten, who helped kill Rosemary LaBianca, boldly claimed she had no regrets. They didn't cry. They didn't hang their heads. They didn't plead for mercy. Instead, they boasted. Though Manson never held a knife himself, he was tried as the mastermind. Prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi exposed the entire brainwashing operation and the madness behind Helter Skelter. He didn't just present evidence, he told a chilling, coherent story of a failed musician who decided he would become famous by spilling blood and terror across America. In March 1971, the court sentenced Manson and 3 of his female followers to death. The nation exhaled in relief, but also in shock. No one could believe that a drifter, a failed rock singer, could build such a twisted religion and turn ordinary young people into remorseless killers. But just a few years later, the state of California temporarily abolished the death penalty. All sentences were commuted to life in prison. Manson and his cold-blooded disciples would never be executed, but they would never walk free again. The trial ended, but the horror it left behind never really went away. When the trial ended, America believed it had closed the door on a horrifying chapter. But the truth is, it hadn't. The name Charles Manson didn't die with the verdict. It lived on, like a scar that refused to fade from the face of the nation. Not because his crimes were more brutal than anyone else's, but because of the way he made others believe that killing was a sacred mission. Manson spent nearly half a century behind bars. Even in prison, he continued to stir chaos, manipulating interviews, dominating headlines. His fiery glare, twisted tattoos, and unhinged ramblings turned him into a kind of anti-cultural icon. Some were horrified by him, others were obsessed, and some even idolized him as a dark, twisted anti-hero. Meanwhile, Sharon Tate, the pregnant woman slaughtered so cruelly, became a symbol of innocence destroyed. She wasn't just a talented actress robbed of her future. She became a voice for all victims who are forgotten while their killers become infamous. Her mother, Doris Tate, refused to stay silent. She turned her grief into action, leading efforts to reform California law, ensuring that victims' families could speak at parole hearings, a right they never had before. Because of her, the voices of the grieving were finally heard. After Doris passed away, Sharon's 2 younger sisters continued the fight. Year after year, they attended parole hearings, standing firm against the release of those who once laughed over their loved ones' corpses. None of the Manson family members were ever granted parole. No matter how remorseful they seemed, no matter how much they tried to bury their past, they could never outrun the shadow of that night in 1969. Charles Manson died in prison on November 19, 2017, at the age of 83. No funeral, no one claimed his body, no tears. And yet, the echo of his evil still lingers, in films, in books, and in the quiet whispers that say, the most terrifying thing isn't a killer, it's someone who convinces others to kill for him. The story of Sharon Tate isn't just about a crime, it's a reminder. That darkness always lurks behind the light, and that evil doesn't have to scream like a monster. Sometimes it only whispers, and the world bleeds. The murder of Sharon Tate didn't just jolt Hollywood awake. It made America realize that sometimes evil doesn't come in the form of guns or knives, but through words, twisted beliefs, and the slow, silent power of isolation. Charles Manson is dead, but his story and the horrors committed by the Manson family still send chills down our spines every time we speak of them. This wasn't just a crime, it was a warning. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on True Crime Bloodstained Files.